With over 50 podcasts that we have launched, there are some things that I have seen are the do's and the don'ts of launching a podcast. Now, if you've already launched your podcast and you're thinking, this is not relevant to me, there are still going to be some tips, some tricks, and some strategies that I'm going to throw in there for those of you who already have a podcast. So don't think that this does not apply to you. But for those who are thinking about launching, or maybe are at that beginning of, I'm about to launch, these are some things you're going to want to consider. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Successful Podcasting Unlocked. I am your host, Alicia Galati. I'm the founder of Galati Media, a full-service podcast management agency where we help business owners launch and maintain lead-generating shows. Today's question is, what are the do's and don'ts of launching a podcast? I want to share some of the ways that we have helped our clients launch podcasts, but not only that, in launching our own shows as well. So we're going to share 5 do's and 5 don'ts, but we're going to start with the don'ts because those are the ones that people are usually doing and focusing on, and then we're going to talk about what to do instead. The first don't is don't just launch your podcast because someone told you to. We all know the big names of the people who have said everyone should have a podcast. If you have a business, you should have a podcast. I actually disagree with that, and I don't think that a podcast is the first thing that you should do, nor do I think that every business owner should have a podcast. Every business owner should have some form of content that they are creating to engage with their audience, connect with them in some way, as well as to educate them. But a podcast is not always the best way for business owners to do that. So instead of just following along with what the big names are telling you to do, instead of that, what you should do is do your research. Look and see, is podcasting even a format that you enjoy? Do you enjoy going in front of a microphone and speaking into it? Do you feel that you would need it to be super scripted, or do you feel that you can go off the cuff? Would you be too distracted to go off the cuff? These are all things that you have to consider, but even beyond that, doing market research can help you decide if a podcast is even necessary for your ideal listener or ideal clients or ideal content engagers. The thing about podcasting is that it is a long game. You are going to be creating content for a very long time, and you may not always see that return on your investment of time and effort right away. So it's important that you go into it knowing this is what I want to do, and I'm going to give it my all. There are ways to do limited series in order to test out if a podcast might be right for you, but that is a conversation for another episode. Our second don't is do not plan out just for your launch. I see people do this so often where they get really excited about the launch. They have this trailer, they've recorded 3 episodes, which that's what we recommend you have as your launch is your trailer plus 3 episodes for your audience to binge. And they have those ready and they get ready to launch it. And then they think, oh, wait, I have to have something for next week too? What? So instead of only having that content ready, I recommend that you plan out at least 10 episodes. Just give yourself 10. That puts you at already past the 7 mark of episodes, which is where most people fall off. And if you're feeling really ambitious, then you can decide on having a season's worth. So if you are doing your podcast in seasons, and that will be a question for a later episode, we will talk about seasons and how to decide if seasons are right for you. But if you decide to do seasons, then you have enough for your season, or at least planned out enough episodes for your season. And then if you're feeling ambitious, like I said, you can also do 25 episodes, which is where most people, they don't hit that 23 mark of episodes. So give yourself 25 episode ideas. Now, this does not mean that you have to be locked into these ideas. You do not have to stay married to them at all in any way. These are simply ideas for you to use as options for your podcast content. Our third don't is do not just follow what someone else is doing. I have several different types of podcasts that I have created over my time in podcasting. I have had one that is an interview and solo. I then moved on to a co-hosted show with my sister. Then I launched the Listeners to Leads podcast, which was more instructional and educational, and then having people on, not as guest experts always, but mostly having people on who have shared some type of podcasting experience or kind of almost case study style podcast episodes, as well as some that feature our guests who have done incredible things or are experts in their field. And then I have this podcast, which is 10 minutes or less, answering podcasting questions. So if I had decided that I wanted to follow what one other person was doing, I might not have found the type of podcast, not only format, but style that would work best for me. And I found that all of these work best for me. I can do it any of these ways, but it took time for me to figure that out. I know that this can feel really overwhelming and it can feel really frustrating because you might feel like you want to have this right the first time. You're not going to have it right the first time. And most likely, when you go back to listen to your initial podcast episodes, you're not going to like them very much. And that's okay. I don't think anyone really likes those episodes very much. Our fourth don't is don't wait until your launch to talk about your podcast. I see people try to do this in their marketing so often. Something new is coming. Something exciting is happening. Instead, engage your audience with the podcast. Ask them which cover art they like best. Ask them which music feels like it inspires them more for the topics. You can ask them, if you were to launch a podcast, which you are going to launch a podcast, what questions would you expect to be answered on that show? What kind of content would you expect to have? Or perhaps even what guests might they expect to see on your podcast. These are all ways to incorporate your audience, get them excited about what's to come, give them that B-roll, the behind the scenes, everything that's going into it. So that way when it comes out, they're not like, whoa, I have this new show to listen to. Instead, they are in your DMs asking, when is this show coming out? That is what you want. You want people, those raving fans, lined up and excited about your podcast. And you can't do that if you're only sharing about it the week of your launch. Get them excited way beforehand. And when I say way beforehand, I mean at least a month ahead of your launch. Tell your audience what's coming, get them excited, and even engage with them by asking them if they would promote your podcast, if they would talk about it, if they would share it with a friend on launch day. Get your email list inspired to connect with you on a deeper level with this audio format. Ask them what podcasts they listen to. These are all different ways that you can engage with your audience before you even launch and before you have content for them to binge. And our fifth don't is don't compare your podcast with others. This happens so often. When we create a podcast or anything really, it's very easy to say, oh, well, this other person got these incredible numbers, or this person was able to get 250 downloads in their first week. How in the world were they able to do that? And why can't I do that? Or why didn't I get that? Most often, we're comparing apples to oranges when it comes to our podcast. Instead, look at your stats, especially after that first 3-month mark of your podcast. I actually don't recommend looking at your stats within that first 3 months of your podcast launching because it's very easy to get distracted by those numbers. So instead, look at the stats at that 3-month mark and say, how can I not do better than my friend or not do better than this other person in this industry, but instead, how can I do better and grow my show based on the numbers that I have today? How can I grow those numbers? That is going to help you feel more successful, but also set realistic expectations for your launch. Those are all of my do's and don'ts for launching a podcast. Obviously, there is so much that goes into launching a podcast, so I wanted to give you a quick downloadable, which is the podcast launch roadmap. Now, what this roadmap does is it walks you through everything that you'll need to do before you launch a podcast. It is free and it comes with a little worksheet that you can also download. And what I wanted to do is just be able to put this in the hands of more people and make it accessible where if you are launching a podcast, you can use this as a step-by-step guide for yourself. you can go to Successful Podcasting Unlocked to get a copy of those resources as well. And we'll make sure that we have that link in the description for you. And if you have any podcasting questions, I would love to answer them. You can go to Successful Podcasting Unlocked as well to submit your questions to be answered on future episodes.